I built a toy truck. It's made primarily out of construction lumber, and this video shows how it was built. It's 22 inches long and about 11 inches high. The frame is a single 2x6. I cut some notches out of the front of that 2x6 because the front of the truck, where the engine compartment is, doesn't have to be as wide as the rest of the frame. Here those cuts are done and the frame is done. The front of the truck is where it's the engine compartment, and I joined two pieces of wood. I glued them together to make that engine compartment. The cab of the truck is also glued up out of 4 different pieces. I glued 2 at a time, and that gave me 2 halves, and then I took those 2 halves and glued those together as well. I found out later I didn't really need to do it that way, but it worked out anyway. Here I've made the cut that forms the windshield. And I also decided to taper the sides just to give it a little more sleek look. I did that tapering on the bandsaw. You can see that cut. There's 2 cuts actually being made here. So now I've sanded the cab a little bit, and later I made another cut to the cab, and you can see it in the final truck. But at this stage, there's just the windshield cut out. I also had to notch the bottom of the cab because it straddles the frame. And the way I notched it was just to run the cab over the spinning blade repeatedly, and I moved the fence a little bit each time, and eventually I got the whole notch cut out. And here you can see that notch at the bottom. The sleeper was made up out of 5 pieces of wood, and each of these pieces of wood was bigger than those that were in the cab. This time I decided to try to glue them all up at once, and that actually worked out okay. So that's where I found out I didn't really need to do it in pieces. And I decided to cut the top of the sleeper at an angle so that it had that aerodynamic look that you see on trucks on the road. I did that with the bandsaw as well. Now I've sanded the sleeper a little bit, and I had to cut the same kind of notch in the bottom, which you'll see in a minute. And again, over and over, just push it over the blade, and eventually you get what you want. And there's the notch. Now it's starting to look like a truck as the pieces get added on. So all the major pieces are held on with glue and also with screws. I put a couple of pocket holes in the engine compartment there because you'll see I screwed it to the cab. Right now I'm just gluing it up. I ran some big 2.5-inch screws up through the bottom of the frame into the engine compartment. they hold it on there pretty good. Then when I glued the cab on, I glued it to the frame obviously as well, but I put some glue there on the engine compartments so that the two pieces are not just glued to the frame and screwed to the frame, but they're glued to each other as well. I put some glue on the sides of the frame because those notches will straddle it and catch some of that glue there too. So now I've got the cab sitting on the frame and I'm tightening up those bottom screws, and right here I guess I'm tightening up the screws that go through those pocket holes. It's becoming really solid at this point. I'm getting ready to put the sleeper on, and same thing basically. Glue on the frame, glue on the cab, glue everywhere. And then there's 3 screws. They're 2.5 inch also. These I countersunk all these holes, so I'm getting more than 2.5 inches of reach. It's screwed on there pretty good. Then I bored a couple of holes through the back of the sleeper, and I'm running a couple of screws that hold the sleeper up against the cab. I just put 2 of those. I figured that would be plenty. To make the wheels, I used a Forstner bit to put a little circle on the stock, and then I cut them out with a hole saw. It's a 3.5 inch hole saw. I got this technique from a YouTube site that I saw, and there's a link to that YouTube site in the description to this video. So I owe it to the guy that figured out how to do it. It's really a nice technique, and you get some pretty nice wheels out of it. The axles I made out of threaded rod, and this axle you see here is made out of 5/16 inch threaded rod, but I decided that wasn't strong enough, so I ended up using 3/8, so they're a little stronger than what they look like here. And that block of wood right there sits over the axle, and then it screws up against the frame, so the wheels and the axle are captive, and they're pinned up against the frame. There's a whole bunch of little things I stuck on there. These are the doors and the windows. I cut these out of some stock that's about 1/8, maybe a little more than 1/8 of an inch thick. I just resawed that stock off a piece of wood that I had. Here's the bumper. It wraps around, and now I'm using a big clamp to glue that bumper on. The doors and the windows and things like that, I just used weights to hold them down while the glue dried. You can see I took some 3/8 inch dowel and I stuck it in the holes where those pocket screws were. I glued them in there. So now I'm just trimming off the excess to get a nice flush finish. That turned out pretty well. You can't really tell they're there by the time I get done painting it and everything. I also took some 3/8 inch dowel and stuck it in those holes that are holding the sleeper to the cab. So here I'm just trimming those clean too. Fuel tank's made out of a big piece of dowel that I have. I needed to split this the long way, so I put this big dowel in the 10 inning jig and sliced it. you'll see when you see the finished truck, you'll see that the fuel tank is this half-round protrusion that sticks off the side of the sleeper. The tailpipes, I glued them on there by running a bead of glue up in that 90-degree corner there that's formed by the cab and the sleeper. And I took some dowel and pushed it in there into the glue. Then I took some weights and put them on there to hold it down there pretty tight while the glue dried. I decided I wanted to add some detail, so I took some real small dowel here and I put some lights up on top of the cab. Just bored some holes there and drove those little pieces of dowel in there with some glue. And then I did the same thing on the sides of the engine compartment, just mainly to give it sort of an industrial look with these knobby things sticking out the side. That came out okay too. I was pretty happy with it. The fenders are made out of some flat stock. It's just some I had laying around. It's actually oak, but it could have been pine. I cut everything at a 45-degree angle, and you can see the fenders made out of these three pieces, and then there's a fourth piece that's the cover that goes over the wheel. So I'm just gluing those three pieces there onto the side. There they are, done being glued. And that's the cover. It's made out of some 1/4 inch plywood I had laying around, so I glued that on there too. That's what it looks like when it's done. Now I've got it all together, I'm getting ready to paint it. Of course I pulled the wheels back off to paint it, but I just took a picture that had them all together just so we could see what it looked like. Now it's done.